NVIDIA just reported one of the most important quarters of all of company history. Everybody wants to know the demand for these NVIDIA chips going forward. You can see right here, NVIDIA's been on a massive roller coaster ride, pretty much going straight up, but now we're getting a little bit toppy in this time period right here, and it's all coming down to demand for the NVIDIA chips. Everybody wants to know, is the demand going good going forward? Did DeepSeek really crush the demand? There's rumors now coming out that Microsoft is going to have less spending on data center. So we're going to break all that down in this video right here. I read every single word of the earnings report. I listened to the entire earnings call to save you guys time so you don't have to do it. Let's break it down in a no BS way. Here we go. So this chart right here is pretty much just a zoomed in version of the chart right here. So this is a 3-month time period right here. So you can see there's a lot of volatility in this time period right here, but for the whole 3-month period, NVIDIA went down 5.57%. You can see in this period right here where there's this massive sharp drop. This here was one of the biggest problems with NVIDIA, and this is where this whole demand fear is coming in right now. So DeepSeek is a Chinese company that pretty much competes with OpenAI, which is ChatGPT, and DeepSeek claimed that they were able to train their large language model for a fraction of the cost that ChatGPT trained theirs for. So the whole thought process behind this is, if DeepSeek is able to do it for a fraction of the cost, there's going to be a lot less demand for these NVIDIA chips going forward. So NVIDIA stock fell 20% on the news, tried to rebound back right here, but now it fell down a little bit right here. So we're going to break down how the demand for NVIDIA chips is going forward based on what Jensen Huang, who's the CEO, just said. And when the sharp drop right here is happening in the stock price, you could just go and guess what the news articles were looking like, and it was really fueling the fire. There's a lot of fear out there in the market, and this whole 20% drop was actually pretty crazy because it did end up being the record market cap loss in a single day, which was NVIDIA. Now, we did get a little bit of that loss back, but the whole question that everybody needs to know is demand. And the earnings report that just dropped that I just finished going through in detail, and I'm going to give you all the information on it in just a second, it's going to let us know crystal clear how the demand is for the NVIDIA chips. Some of the stuff is honestly good, but some of the stuff is honestly bad. So I'm going to break it all down for you guys right here. So like I said, the demand concerns are big. That's why the stock has been super volatile in that 3-month time period. The whole DeepSeek stuff, the whole rumor that Microsoft is canceling data center expansion, the whole thing with AMD coming in and becoming more competitive to them, then that means NVIDIA might have to drop their prices to stay competitive with AMD. That's going to hurt profit margins. That's going to hurt earnings per share. So that implies that the growth might not be able to keep up. And then there's a lot of big companies coming out saying that they're not getting an ROI on the money they're spending on these NVIDIA chips to try to get their companies AI integrated and try to be more efficient. So there is rumors that some companies are pulling back, but there also are rumors that some companies are going even deeper into it. We're going to go into that in just a second. And then, of course, valuation concerns are a big thing. The stock is trading at a pretty high valuation. I'm not saying it's a bubble, but it's also not cheap. There's a lot of high expectations that are priced into the stock, and those high expectations have to be met in order for the stock to keep going higher. Now, in just a little bit, we're going to go into a big secret that NVIDIA does have that they just dropped on this earnings report that I picked up on, and maybe not a lot of people did pick up on it. And based on this information, I made 3 really big trades that I think could absolutely blow my account up. So stick around. We're going to go into that in just a second. Now, after I went through the earnings call, after I went through the earnings report, and honestly, it takes me like a couple hours to read through these earnings reports because there's a lot of information there to digest and really understand like what it means. Everything is kind of becoming more crystal clear right now on what NVIDIA is trying to do and how the demand is going forward for these chips. So let's break down some of the numbers right here just to get an idea of the numbers they reported, what they were expecting, and what they got it going forward. And then I'm going to go into the big secret, and it's actually going to be a quote from Jensen himself, who's the CEO of the demand for the company, because the number one thing that matters for NVIDIA right now to take the next leg higher is going to be demand for the chips. Everybody is worried about that. Everybody is worried about DeepSeek. Let's go into the numbers. Let's see how they did. Then we'll go into that right there. So these are the actual numbers right here, and this is what the consensus was right here. So this is like actual versus expected. So you can see most of the stuff they did beat on, but they did miss on a couple things over here. But you can see the total revenue is $39 billion. Of that, the data center is going to be $35 billion. So this is the massive whale in the room, and this is up 93% year over year for that revenue. That's amazing. That's super good. The big question is, how is the demand going forward from here? Because this is 3 months into the past, but the DeepSeek stuff wasn't really worked into that entire quarter. So you could see down here on the guidance is questionable. So they're guiding their gross profit margin to be 71% for the next quarter. This quarter they reported at 73.5%, but then the prior year we were at 76%. So from 76 to 73 to 71, you could see the pressures on the gross margins. Now, whether that be from Blackwell ramping, that could be another thing, because they're ramping Blackwell and it's not ramping into full production yet, so they're not efficient yet, and they did definitely talk about that on the earnings call, where they expect like Q1 of 2026, and I get it, it's Q1 of 2026, it's kind of confusing. So NVIDIA actually brings their quarters 2 quarters backwards. So they just reported fiscal year 2025 Q4. So just to be clear on this so you guys know, October, November, December of 2024 is this quarter right here. So there's calendar year and fiscal year. The calendar year is October, November, December of 2024. But the fiscal year is fiscal year 2025 of quarter 4. So keep that in mind for the actual dates that this applies to. So when they're talking about Q1 of 2026, they're actually talking about January, February, March of 2025. I know it's confusing and it's annoying, but that's just how they do this stuff. So they're expecting a gross margin of 71% for January, February, March of 2025. That's obviously going down. But they did talk about how as these quarters go on, Blackwell is gonna ramp and Blackwell is gonna become more efficient. So these profit margins are expected to trend back up into the 75% range by the end of 2025. So that is good. I like that right there. But also I'm wondering, as this stuff is trending down right here for the profit margin, how much of this is attributed to AMD where they're actually becoming more competitive with NVIDIA, and NVIDIA is having to cut their prices because AMD is saying we could do it for 20% less. So it's kind of like NVIDIA might have to drop their prices to stay competitive. Now I get it that NVIDIA has CUDA, which CUDA is essentially like the software that runs on top of the NVIDIA chips. AMD doesn't really have like an iOS for an iPhone yet. AMD pretty much sells the iPhone, but NVIDIA is selling the iPhone with the iOS. You can't really have an iPhone with the iOS, so that's why NVIDIA does so well, because the iOS that NVIDIA has, which is called CUDA, it only works on the NVIDIA chips. So that is a pretty good moat for NVIDIA. But yes, this is concerning about the profit margins dropping pretty sharp right here. So I'm going to show you on the next couple screens 4 quotes that Jensen just said on the earnings call, and I consider this to be NVIDIA's big secret that most people aren't going to catch, because honestly most people aren't going to spend the time to read these earnings reports and then listen to the earnings calls. But I do all that stuff for you guys because I want to cut out all the BS and save you guys a bunch of time, because we're all here to make money and I want to show you guys what I'm personally doing. That's why I'm going to show you the 3 trades that I just made in my Charles Schwab account to show you how I'm going to capitalize on what NVIDIA is going to do going forward. So I call this the big secret. So quote number 1 from Jensen: demand for the Blackwell chip is amazing. Quote number 2: 10x more compute is needed for the next gen robotic AI. So there's basically like phase 1 AI and phase 2 AI as he described it on the earnings report. Phase 1 is essentially building all these data centers to train ChatGPT, to train Grok, to train Gemini, to train DeepSeek, whatever is going to be trained. Those are pretty much just like chat bots. But then we're going to have real world AI where we're going to have these autonomous robots walking around doing our dishes, doing our laundry, whatever we want them to do. So Jensen basically said to train stage 2 or phase 2 AI, it's going to take 10 to 100 times more compute to be able to train those robots in the self-driving cars and stuff like that. So you got to think about this from a business perspective from a company like Tesla. Tesla's a big manufacturing company. They talk about how they not only have the best tech and the best AI, but they're able to produce this stuff on a mass scale. So in order for Tesla to push millions of these humanoid robots, they have to train these robots to be good enough that people are going to want to buy for themselves or to put into warehouses or do any sort of business work that people do in order to make it useful enough to justify the price of the robot. So it's kind of like an arms race of who could get there first. And it's kind of like whoever gets there first is probably going to capture a huge part of that margin. So it's kind of like the first company to get their robot to scale in order to go chip at that multi-trillion-dollar addressable market of autonomous robots. Those are the companies that are going to make the most amount of money. So it's kind of like an arms race of we need to get as many chips as we can from NVIDIA to train our robot, to get our robot out there and be the best one the fastest possible. If you're not doing that, you're going to get left behind and you're going to get smoked. It's kind of like if Tesla becomes a leader and they are first to win, all these other companies are then going to be in the chase, but it's going to be like, oh, I already have my Optimus robot. If company XYZ is not 5 times better, I'm not going to waste my time buying that robot. I'm just going to go with the Tesla one. So it's all about getting there first. And Jensen was basically talking about the demand for the chips was super strong in phase 1, and the demand is still there, obviously, because there's a lot of companies that need to scale their data centers that didn't scale them yet. But going into phase 2, there's going to be 10 to 100 times more compute power required to justify all the compute needed for phase 2. Now, I get it that as these chips come out, they're becoming more powerful, so you're not going to need as many chips. But Jensen said the chips are not getting 10 to 100 100 times better on the next version of the chip. They're maybe getting 2, 3, 4 times better, but not 10 to 100 times better. So the demand for the chips is going to be astronomical going into the future. So honestly, I've listened to a crap ton of these earnings calls with Jensen, and I haven't heard him be more bullish than what he is bullish right now. So that makes me bullish too, because he's one of the AI pioneers. He's been seeing this transformation happening in AI for years right now. And the reason why NVIDIA is on top is because they were first to the race. And it's kind of like, just look at AMD, for example. If NVIDIA equals Tesla, where Tesla gets the bot out there first, maybe some other company like Meta wants to build a bot, but they're like 3 years behind. Tesla's already building their bot. They're already making it better. They're already training it. A lot of these other companies aren't even there yet. So it's kind of like first to win the race is the one that's going to win the most amount of money. NVIDIA's first. They're making the most amount of money. Tesla might be first. They might make the most amount of money. Of course, nothing is guaranteed, but that's why he said right here, customers are very anxious and impatient to get their Blackwells. So Jensen talked about the gross margins of the company, and he said they're going to improve significantly in a couple of quarters, but the reason why the margins are kind of low right now is because he said they're just pushing for volume right now, and they're slowly going to optimize their margins as they go on to become more efficient. They just want to get these chips out there, make all their customers happy, and really just integrate NVIDIA deeper into the ecosystem before AMD could take really any of that market share. So the key takeaways, and then I'm going to show you into my Charles Schwab account, it's roughly $1 million of value. There's a lot of volatility in there, so some days it's $1 million, some days it's 900K, but overall it's bouncing around in that range right there. So I think that these are solid numbers from NVIDIA, even though Blackwell is ramping. As time goes on, the gross margins are going to go up. That's going to boost earnings per share, which means the share price is probably going to go up too, because earnings are the number one thing that matters in the long run for what a stock is going to do. So I am bullish NVIDIA, but I do expect there to be a lot of volatility with the stock, especially around Trump and tariffs and demand and stuff like that. But for me personally, after listening to this earnings call and reading through the report, I don't really have any concerns for the demand of NVIDIA. And you could also get hints from looking at other companies like SMCI, for example. SMCI builds the server racks that you incorporate these NVIDIA chips into the data centers. SMCI is projecting their revenue to go from 25 billion this year to 40 billion next year, so almost a double of revenue. So SMCI pretty much knows there's a lot of demand to build these data centers, so that's why they're guiding so high on their revenue going forward. That's also like another way to double check that NVIDIA has strong demand going forward. So I'm very bullish. Jensen's very bullish. Honestly, this is the most bullish I've seen him in a while. So let's look into my Charles Schwab account. I'll show you the 3 trades I just made, and then we'll wrap it up. So these right here are the 3 most recent trades that I made to capitalize on what I think is going to happen. I sold puts on NVIDIA, I bought calls on NVIDIA, and I bought calls on Micron. Micron is essentially a company that supplies memory to the data centers, so you can't really have NVIDIA without Micron, and you can't really have any of this stuff without SMCI. So I am bullish on SMCI too, but there's a lot of other things revolving that company why I don't have a position on it right now. But you could make a lot of money on SMCI too going forward if you're patient. But just notice my expiration dates right here. 6/18 of 2026 for the puts, 1/15 of 27 for the calls, and then 12/19 of 2025 for the calls right here. So I went pretty far out on my expiration dates right here because maybe we do get tariffs on chips and stuff like that. So maybe we get tariffs on them in a month or two, and then maybe they last for 3 months, but then they get rid of them or they work out some deal. That's going to give time for the stock to dip when the tariffs go in, and then when the tariffs come out, the stock's going to go back up. I'm going to have time to capture the true move that I'm trying to capture on these stocks right here. So just a cool little thing to think about right here. I think NVIDIA is going to hit $300 per share by this expiration date right here. If it does, this contract is going to be worth $300,000. So I bought it for $37,000 right here. It's currently worth 42. That's how you could see I'm up roughly $4,600, but 10 contracts times 100 shares, that's 1,000 shares. 1,000 shares at $300 per share, that is $300,000 this contract will be worth. But like I said, there's going to be volatility. You have to be patient. And if you don't understand how to do stock options just yet, click the link below for my course. If you don't want to do my course, watch this video right here. I'm going to break down more of the option stuff that I do. See you guys later.